Did you ever get your parents fired? My mom's teaching contract had a morality clause that included me. If I got a single disciplinary action, she'd be fired immediately. The principal announced her contract clause at a staff meeting, so every teacher and eventually every student knew I couldn't fight back or even argue without her getting fired. I became an expert at de-escalation. When kids shoved me into lockers, I'd laugh it off. When they threw my lunch in the trash, I'd say I wasn't hungry anyway. I learned which hallways to avoid, which bathrooms were safe, how to become invisible. My mom knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her the truth because she'd confront the kids and that would just make it worse. She kept asking why I'd lost weight, why I never wanted to go to school activities, why I flinched when anyone moved too fast near me. The main problem was this senior who'd failed junior year twice and was now in my grade. He was twice my size and had already been expelled from 2 other schools, but his dad donated money to the football team, so he kept getting another chance. He started small, just bumping into me in the hallway, then knocking books out of my hands, then spitting in my food. I documented everything in a notebook, thinking maybe if it got bad enough I could show someone, but I knew nobody would risk the football donations to help me. It escalated slowly over 3 months. He'd corner me in empty classrooms and describe what he wanted to do to me, always careful to do it when nobody else was around. He started following me home, sitting outside our apartment in his car, sending me pictures of my mom through our kitchen window. I couldn't tell anyone because his dad's lawyer had gotten him out of 3 assault charges already, and any complaint from me would just lead to my mom being fired for creating drama. I tried everything to avoid him. I changed my routes to class, ate lunch in teachers' rooms, stayed after school until he got bored and left. I even considered dropping out, but that would violate my mom's contract too, since it required me to be enrolled as a full-time student. We were trapped, and he knew it. He'd whisper, "Your mom's gonna be homeless because of you," every time he passed me in the hall. On a Tuesday morning, I was early to school, trying to finish homework in the library. The building was mostly empty, just a few teachers setting up their classrooms. I went to the bathroom and he was waiting in there like he'd been watching for me. He'd scratched something into the stall door the day before. My mom's name and what he wanted to do to her after she got fired. I should have turned around and left, but I was so tired of running. He grabbed me by the throat before I could react and slammed me against the wall, hard enough that the paper towel dispenser fell off. He was laughing, saying he was tired of waiting, and today was the day he'd make me scream loud enough for the whole school to hear. His hands were so big they wrapped completely around my neck, and when I tried to call for help, nothing came out but a wheeze. He dragged me into a stall and started slamming my head against the toilet, holding my face down toward the water. The automatic flush kept triggering from the movement, and water was going up my nose. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, and I genuinely thought he was going to drown me in a fucking school toilet. He kept saying my mom would thank him for getting her fired, that we deserved to be back on the streets. My vision was going black, and I could taste blood when my hand found his face, and I jammed my thumb into his eye as hard as I could. He screamed and let go, stumbling backward out of the stall. I kicked him in the balls while he was clutching his face, and when he doubled over, I kept kicking, because I knew if he got up, he'd kill me. I kicked him in the ribs, the stomach, anywhere I could reach, sobbing and screaming the whole time. I kicked him until he stopped moving. Then I ran out of the bathroom covered in his blood and my own, straight into the principal who'd heard the screaming. The senior was taken away in an ambulance with a detached retina and broken ribs. His dad's lawyer was at the school within an hour, demanding I be arrested for assault. The security footage only showed me running out covered in blood and him being carried out unconscious. It didn't show what happened inside the bathroom, didn't show the months of stalking, didn't show him trying to drown me. My mom was called out of her first period class while I sat in the nurse's office with ice on my bruised throat. I could hear her heels clicking down the hallway, that specific sound of her trying to walk professionally when she was terrified. She burst through the door and gasped when she saw my face, the bruises already turning purple around my neck. The principal followed her in, closing the door behind him. He looked at my mom, not at me, when he spoke. "Your son engaged in a violent assault this morning that sent another student to the hospital," he said, pulling out his phone to show her photos of the senior's injuries. "You know what this means for your employment, and I need your classroom keys before you leave the building." Mom's hand went to her pocket where she kept her classroom keys on a worn lanyard she'd had for 12 years, and I watched her fingers shake as they touched the metal. The nurse kept dabbing at my throat with something cold while checking my pulse every few seconds, muttering about how I needed to get to the hospital right away. Mom pulled her hand back from her pocket and stared at the principal for what felt like forever. "I'm not giving you anything without my union rep here," she said, her voice steady even though her whole body was trembling. The principal's face turned this dark red color, and he stepped closer to her. "You hand over those keys right now, or I'll have security remove you from this building for trespassing," he said, pulling out his phone like he was about to make the call. The door opened, and Officer Frey walked in, the school resource officer who'd been here since I was a freshman. He looked at me sitting there with ice on my neck, then at Mom and the principal standing face to face, and told us we needed to separate into different rooms while he took statements. Mom refused to leave me alone, so Officer Frey took me to the empty office next door while the nurse followed, still pressing ice against my throat. I tried to tell him about the 3 months of stalking, about the pictures through our window, about being followed home, but my voice came out all raspy and broken. He wrote everything down in his little notebook without any expression on his face, just asking me to repeat things when my voice got too weak to hear. The nurse interrupted after 10 minutes, saying she couldn't be responsible if I didn't get immediate medical attention for possible internal injuries from the strangulation. Mom drove me to the hospital with one hand on the wheel and the other holding her phone, calling the teachers' union emergency line while checking on me every few seconds. Her knuckles were completely white from gripping the steering wheel so hard, and she kept asking if I could breathe okay, if my throat hurt, if I felt dizzy. The emergency room was mostly empty that early in the morning, and they took me straight back when the triage nurse saw the bruises on my neck. Dr. Goldman came in with a camera and started taking pictures of every mark on my throat, then ordered x-rays to check for damage to my windpipe. He measured each bruise with a little ruler and documented the pattern of finger marks that wrapped around my neck. "These are textbook strangulation injuries," he told my mom quietly. quietly while I was getting dressed after the exam. Another minute or two, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Mom's legs gave out a little, and she had to grab the exam table to stay standing. We were sitting in the waiting room for the x-ray results when Dale Hartley from the teachers union showed up with this huge folder of papers. She'd already pulled Mom's contract and found the section about the morality clause, plus emails showing the principal had announced it at a staff meeting, which violated privacy protocols. They broke their own rules by making your private contract terms public knowledge, she said, flipping through pages and highlighting sections. Officer Frey showed up at the hospital about an hour later to do a more detailed interview since the nurse had rushed us out of school. I handed him photocopies of my notebook where I documented every single incident for 3 months, dates and times, and what the senior had said or done. He put each page in a separate evidence bag and said he'd need to verify the dates against school attendance records and security footage. That night after we got home from the hospital, Mom made me sit at the kitchen table while she photocopied every page of my notebook 3 times. She hid the original in a shoebox in her bedroom closet, then started her own notebook, writing down everything that had happened that day while it was still fresh. She wrote for 2 hours straight, filling page after page with her neat teacher handwriting, documenting every threat, every word the principal had said, every detail she could remember. The next morning, we had to go back to the school for Mom's union meeting that Dale had scheduled, and when we pulled into the parking lot, the senior's dad's Mercedes was already there. We could hear shouting from the principal's office before we even got to the main doors, his dad's voice carrying down the hallway, demanding I be arrested for felony assault. 2 men in expensive suits were with him, both carrying briefcases and talking on their phones at the same time. Dale met us in the hallway and told us to wait in the conference room while she dealt with the lawyers, but we could still hear them through the walls, threatening lawsuits and criminal charges and saying they'd destroy us. I'm curious why the principal would announce that morality clause at a staff meeting. That seems like such an odd choice that practically painted a target on this kid's back. After about 20 minutes, the principal came out of his office looking tired and angry. He walked straight up to me without even looking at Mom or Dale. "You're being emergency suspended pending a disciplinary hearing," he said, handing me a paper. "You need to leave campus immediately, and you're not allowed back until the hearing." My legs felt like jelly, and Mom had to put her arm around me to keep me standing. As we walked out of the building, past all the windows where kids were watching from their classrooms, past the senior's dad who was standing by his car on his phone, probably calling more lawyers. My phone started buzzing before we even got to the car, and I saw notifications flooding in from Instagram and Snapchat. Someone had already posted a photo of the ambulance at the school with the caption, "Psycho kid almost killed a student this morning," and it had over 200 likes in 20 minutes. The comments were getting worse by the second, with people calling me a monster and saying I should be locked up. Mom grabbed my phone and turned it off, but not before I saw someone had posted the senior's hospital photos showing his swollen eye and bruised ribs. Nobody posted pictures of the purple handprints around my neck or the blood vessels that had burst in my eyes from being strangled. Kids from the school were sharing the posts and adding their own stories about how I was always weird and violent, even though most of them had never talked to me. By the time we got home, my Instagram had 300 new followers, all sending me messages about how I deserved to die. Mom made me delete all my social media apps while she sat next to me on the couch, but screenshots were already spreading everywhere. Someone found our apartment complex on Google Maps and posted it with my mom's name and which unit we lived in. The death threats started coming through Mom's school email within hours, and she had to call Dale to ask what to do about them. Dale told her to screenshot everything and forward it to her office for documentation, but not to respond to any of it. That night, Mom's phone rang 17 times from blocked numbers, and when she finally answered one, it was just someone breathing heavily before hanging up. Thursday morning, Mom got a call from the district office saying her pay was being frozen, pending the investigation into my disciplinary action. She hung up the phone and just stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing for a full minute before sitting down. Friday afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table with all our bills spread out trying to figure out what we could afford. Mom had her calculator out and kept running the same numbers over and over like they might change if she tried hard enough. She moved the electric bill to the pay later pile, along with the car insurance, and her hands were shaking. I watched her write down how much we had in savings, then cross it out and write a smaller number after remembering the hospital copay. She was trying not to cry, but I could see tears dripping onto the paper, making the ink run. We had maybe 6 weeks of money if we only bought rice and beans and didn't turn on the heat. Dale came over Saturday morning with a thick folder and spread papers across our coffee table explaining our legal options. She said we needed to file a formal grievance about the principal announcing Mom's contract publicly, which violated district privacy policies. She pulled out forms for requesting all security footage from the school through proper legal channels. Then she explained we should pursue a protective order against the senior to keep him away from us. She warned us this would take months or maybe years, and there was no guarantee we'd win any of it. She kept using words like precedent and disclosure violations, but all I heard was that we were basically alone against the senior's dad's money. Monday morning, Dale called to say the school librarian had come forward with sign-in logs from that morning. The logs showed I'd checked into the library at 7:15 a.m. to use the computer for homework. The bathroom incident happened at 7:30 a.m., according to the principal's report, which proved I was just doing homework beforehand. Dale said this helped establish a timeline, but warned it was still my word against the seniors about what happened in the bathroom. Tuesday night, we went out to the parking lot to drive to the grocery store and found our car with deep scratches all along the driver's side. The word liar was carved into the hood, and both mirrors were broken off. An envelope was tucked under the windshield wiper with no return address or stamp on it. Mom's hands shook as she opened it, and inside was a photo of our apartment door taken from the hallway. She called 911, and 2 officers showed up an hour later to take a report. They took pictures of the car and bagged the envelope, but said without witnesses or cameras in our lot, they couldn't do much. The next morning, I had my follow-up appointment at the ER that Mom had scheduled to check on my injuries. Dr. Goldman examined my throat and noted the bruising had spread down to my chest in purple and yellow patches. He ordered a CT scan of my head head because I was still getting dizzy and seeing spots when I stood up too fast. The results showed what he called mild traumatic brain injury, consistent with repeated blunt force trauma from having my head slammed into the toilet. He also documented what he called significant psychological trauma markers, including my flinching whenever he moved too quickly near me. He spent an hour writing a detailed medical report describing each injury and their likely causes. Dale called that afternoon to say the medical report would be crucial evidence for both the criminal case and Mom's employment grievance. Over the next 3 days, I sat at my computer going through 3 months of messages from the senior. Most came from fake Instagram accounts and burner phone numbers, but I screenshotted every single one. The messages started small in September with him just saying, "Hey loser," but by November he was sending detailed descriptions of violence. I organized them all by date and time in a spreadsheet showing how they got worse each week. The worst ones came the week before the bathroom attack, where he described exactly what he wanted to do to me. I found 47 separate accounts he'd made just to harass me, and 12 different phone numbers he'd used. Dale said the pattern of escalation was important, even if we couldn't prove every account was definitely his. Thursday morning, Dale sent a formal request to our apartment building manager, asking for exterior security footage. The building had cameras on all the entrances and parking areas that saved footage for 90 days. The manager called us that afternoon, saying he'd found something we needed to see. We went to his office and watched footage from the past month, showing the senior's car parked outside our building at least 15 different nights. The timestamps showed him sitting there for hours, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, just watching our windows. The manager burned all the footage onto a DVD and gave us a signed statement about when he'd pulled it. Dale immediately filed the footage as evidence with both the police and the school district. Friday afternoon, the principal sent an email saying he couldn't release security footage from near the bathroom due to student privacy laws. Dale called him within 5 minutes, challenging this claim and citing specific exceptions for violent crime investigations. She explained that privacy laws had clear provisions for releasing footage when it involved assault or attempted murder. The principal responded that he'd need to consult with the district's legal team before making any decisions about footage. Dale hung up and immediately started drafting a comprehensive public records request for all hallway security cameras from that morning. She also requested any emails between the principal and the senior's father from the past 6 months. She filed it with the district that afternoon, and they had 30 days to respond, but she warned us they'd probably stall as long as legally possible. Monday morning, Officer Frey called to say he'd gone to the courthouse to request a warrant for the senior's phone records. The judge looked at our evidence for maybe 2 minutes before saying there wasn't enough probable cause without witnesses who actually saw the stalking happen. Officer Frey explained that even if the judge changed his mind later, the backlog for phone records meant we wouldn't get results for at least 3 months. That same afternoon, Dale got an anonymous email with screenshots of messages between football team donors. They were all talking about protecting the program and making sure one incident didn't ruin team morale before playoffs. One donor wrote that they needed to handle this quietly before it became a bigger scandal. Another said the senior was a good kid who just made a mistake and shouldn't have his whole life ruined. Dale printed every screenshot and added them to our growing evidence file. Tuesday morning, a woman from the district called saying they'd assigned me a public defender for the criminal case. We met her that afternoon in a tiny office downtown where the air conditioning didn't work and files were stacked everywhere. She explained that since I was still a minor, my juvenile record could be sealed after everything was over. But then she warned us the senior's lawyer was already pushing to try me as an adult because of the severity of his injuries. She started taking notes for a self-defense case, but kept mentioning how local politics affected these kinds of cases. The whole meeting, she kept checking her phone, and I could tell she had too many cases already. Wednesday, we spent 6 hours organizing every piece of evidence for the protective order hearing. Mom bought a huge binder and dividers so we could separate everything by date. Something feels off about that principal refusing to release security footage when Dale clearly knows the law allows it for violent crimes. Makes me wonder what he's trying to hide or who he's protecting. The senior's car showing up outside their apartment 15 times. We printed all the stalking messages, the photos he took of our apartment, the building's security footage stills, and my medical records. The binder ended up being over 2 inches thick and weighed more than my school backpack. Thursday night, we practiced my testimony over and over in the living room. Mom pretended to be the judge and asked me questions about what happened in the bathroom. Every time I tried to describe him holding my head in the toilet, my voice would crack and I'd have to start over. We practiced until almost midnight when I could finally get through the whole story without completely breaking down. Friday was the hearing, and I threw up twice that morning from nerves. At the courthouse, I started hyperventilating in the hallway and couldn't catch my breath no matter how hard I tried. Mom pulled up a YouTube video on her phone about breathing exercises and coached me through them right there in the hallway. We ended up being 15 minutes late to the hearing, and the senior's lawyer was already there, smirking at us as we rushed in. The judge listened to my testimony for 20 minutes without any expression on her face. She looked through our binder of evidence, flipping pages quickly like she'd seen this kind of thing 100 times before. The senior's lawyer kept objecting to everything, saying the messages couldn't be proven to be from his client. Finally, the judge raised her hand for silence and granted a temporary protective order. The senior had to stay at least 300 feet away from me and couldn't contact me in any way. It should have felt like a win, but Dale leaned over and whispered that these orders were just pieces of paper if someone really wanted to violate them. That night around 11, Mom's phone rang with a blocked number. A muffled voice told her she better drop the union grievance if she knew what was good for us. Mom hit record on her old tape recorder she kept by the phone and got most of the threat on tape. She played it back 3 times trying to recognize the voice, but it was too distorted. We added the tape to our evidence file even though we knew it would be hard to prove who made the call. Saturday afternoon, Officer Frey asked to meet us at a coffee shop instead of the police station. He looked around to make sure nobody was listening before telling us the district attorney was dragging his feet on filing charges. The senior's senior's family were huge political donors and contributed to the DA's last campaign. Officer Frey seemed really frustrated, running his hand through his hair and saying his hands were tied, without the DA's approval to move forward. He advised us to document everything and be patient, but I could tell he didn't think anything would actually happen. Sunday, Dale called with huge news she discovered while going through district emails. The principal had sent an email to all staff the day after that meeting where he'd announced Mom's contract clause. The email confirmed that he'd discussed the specific details of her employment contract in the meeting. Dale said this was proof the district violated their own confidentiality policies by making private employment information public. She was already drafting a formal complaint to add to Mom's grievance file. Monday morning, the mail brought a notice for my disciplinary hearing with the school district. Mom read through the panel members, and her face went white. 3 of the 5 panel members were football team donors, and the other 2 were administrators who worked directly under the principal. Dale immediately started drafting a request for change of venue, citing obvious bias in the panel selection. She filed it that afternoon, but warned us these requests almost never got approved because the district got to choose their own hearing officers. The whole situation felt rigged from the start, and we were just going through the motions hoping something would eventually go our way. Tuesday morning, the senior's lawyer called Dale with what he called a generous offer. I'd write a formal apology letter admitting full responsibility for the assault, and they'd recommend the DA drop criminal charges. Dale put him on speaker so we could all hear his smug voice explaining how this was the best deal we'd get. Mom's hands were shaking as she poured coffee, and Dale was already shaking her head before he even finished talking. She told him that any admission of guilt would destroy both Mom's union case and my self-defense claim. The lawyer laughed and said we had 24 hours to think about it before he pushed for maximum charges. I spent the next 3 days staring at a blank piece of paper trying to figure out what to write. Mom kept bringing me sandwiches I couldn't eat, and Dale kept calling with different versions of wording we could try. I finally wrote a statement that only said I defended myself when I believed my life was in immediate danger. I printed it on our old printer that kept jamming, and Dale faxed it to the senior's lawyer Thursday afternoon. He called back within 10 minutes saying it was completely insufficient and insulting to his client. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from a block number. Someone from the school had seen the senior follow me into the bathroom that morning and heard the screaming. They said they'd been too scared to come forward before, but they'd provide a written statement if we promised to keep them anonymous. Dale drove to meet them at a Starbucks across town and came back with 2 pages of handwritten testimony. The witness described seeing the senior wait outside the library, watching me, then follow me to the bathroom. They heard crashes and screaming, and my voice begging him to stop. Dale scanned the pages and added them to our evidence binder, which was getting thicker every day. Mom remembered the photos the senior had sent of her through our kitchen window, and Dale said we should check the metadata. I used an online tool to extract the information, and my stomach dropped when I saw the results. The GPS coordinates showed he'd stood in the exact same spot outside our building on 14 different nights over 3 weeks. The timestamps showed he'd stay there for hours, sometimes past midnight. Dale printed everything and highlighted the patterns showing clear stalking behavior. Officer Frey came by Friday afternoon looking frustrated. He suspected one of the football players had been helping the senior with the stalking, but couldn't get enough evidence for probable cause to question anyone. He told us off the record that the whole team was protecting each other and nobody would talk. He tried to get phone records, but the judge denied his warrant request, saying there wasn't enough evidence yet. Mom started sending out resumes to other school districts that weekend. She'd get initial interest and schedule phone interviews, but then they'd suddenly cancel. 3 different schools called to cancel interviews at the last minute with vague excuses about positions being filled. After the 5th cancellation, Mom stopped applying and just sat at the kitchen table staring at her laptop. Our savings were running out fast without her paycheck. We sold her grandmother's jewelry at a pawn shop for less than a quarter of what it was worth. I packed up my gaming system and sold it to a kid from the school for $200. Mom called the electric company to set up a payment plan, and her voice cracked when she explained why we were behind. The lady on the phone was kind and gave us an extra month before they'd shut off service. Monday morning, Dale called with news from the DA's office. They were offering a diversion program where I'd plead to misdemeanor assault and get 18 months probation plus mandatory counseling. If I completed everything, the charge would be dismissed. The senior's lawyer immediately objected and demanded felony charges with real jail time. The negotiations stalled completely with neither side willing to budge. Dale decided to go on offense and filed an unfair labor practice complaint with the state labor board. She argued the district violated Mom's rights by publicly announcing her private contract terms at that staff meeting. The investigation would take years, but at least it created an official record of what the district did wrong. Dale warned us the district would probably retaliate once they got served with a complaint. Someone at the district leaked our school board hearing date to local Facebook groups. Within hours, the comment sections exploded with people taking sides. Half called me a violent thug who should be in jail, and the other half said I was defending myself from a known bully. People who'd never met us were arguing about whether Mom deserved to lose her job. Someone posted our address and said people should show us what happens to violent kids. I stopped reading after someone said they hoped I got what was coming to me in juvenile detention. The librarian called Dale 2 days later, saying she'd been thinking about that Tuesday morning and remembered something important. She'd been setting up the book display when she saw the senior standing outside the library entrance for almost 10 minutes, just watching me through the glass doors while I worked on my homework. She thought it was weird at the time, but didn't connect it until she heard about the bathroom attack. Dale drove to the school that afternoon and got her sworn statement typed up on official letterhead, adding it to our growing evidence binder that was now 3 inches thick. Officer Frey spent the next week gathering all the witness statements we'd collected and putting them into a formal report for the district attorney. He highlighted the pattern of stalking behavior with dates and times, cross-referenced with the security footage from our apartment building and the school's attendance records. The DA's office sent back a form letter saying they were reviewing the case, but needed to see how the school board hearing went before making any charging decisions. Dale, finding that email about the principal sharing Mom's contract details makes me wonder who else knew about this specific targeting from the start. The seniors' family being big political donors explains a lot about why everyone's dragging their feet, but I'm curious what other connections they have that we're not seeing yet. Officer Frey called us that night, and I could hear the frustration in his voice when he explained that meant they were waiting to see which way the political wind was blowing. 3 nights later, I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Mom froze at the window. The senior's car was creeping past our building, going maybe 5 miles an hour, and we could see him staring up at our apartment. He drove by again 20 minutes later. Same slow speed, and Mom was already on the phone with Officer Frey. Turns out the traffic camera at the corner caught his license plate both times. Clear violations of the protective order that required him to stay 300 feet away. Officer Frey arrested him at his house that night, but by morning his dad had posted the $5,000 bail, and he was back home. The DA finally called Dale's office the following Monday with their charging decision. They were filing misdemeanor assault charges against me and protective order violation against the senior, scheduling both cases for the same week in juvenile court. Dale said it was unusual to schedule them together, but might work in our favor if the judge saw the connection between the cases. She warned me the assault charge could still mean probation and a permanent record, even if we won. The school board hearing was set for Thursday afternoon in the district office conference room. Dale spent 3 days preparing her questions and organizing our evidence into labeled tabs for easy reference. She had emails, witness statements, medical records, and a timeline showing how everything connected. When we walked into the hearing room, 5 board members sat behind a long table looking uncomfortable, while the principal sat at a separate table with the district's lawyer. The senior's dad was in the audience section glaring at us, and I tried not to look at him. Dale started by questioning the principal about the staff meeting where he announced Mom's contract terms. She pulled out the email he'd sent afterward confirming what he'd said, asking him to explain why he felt it necessary to share one teacher's private employment details with the entire staff. He shifted in his seat and said it was for transparency, but when Dale asked why only Mom's contract was discussed and not any other teacher's, he couldn't give a real answer. Dale then introduced an email dated the day before the bathroom attack, where the senior's father had written to the principal, expressing concerns about Mom's influence on students and suggesting her contract situation made her unsuitable for the classroom. The principal claimed the timing was purely coincidental, but I saw 2 board members exchange looks, and one of them wrote something in her notebook. When it was my turn to testify, Dale had me stand at the podium with my evidence binder. For 12 minutes, I went through everything, showing the medical photos of the purple bruises around my neck, the doctor's report about nearly fatal strangulation, the pages from my notebook documenting 3 months of escalating harassment. My voice stayed steady, even when the senior's father shook his head and muttered something that sounded like liar under his breath. I showed them the photos he'd taken through our kitchen window, the timestamps proving he'd been stalking us for weeks. The board asked a few questions about why I hadn't reported it sooner, and I explained about the contract clause, how any complaint would have gotten Mom fired immediately. One board member looked directly at the principal when I said that. After 3 hours of testimony and evidence, the board president said they needed time to review everything and would issue their decision in 2 weeks. But then she added that pending their investigation, Mom would be placed on unpaid administrative leave rather than immediate termination. It wasn't a victory, but it bought us time and meant Mom wasn't officially fired yet. Dale squeezed my shoulder as we left, whispering that we'd done better than she expected. 2 days before my court date, the DA's office called with a plea offer. If I agreed to plead to disorderly conduct instead of assault, I'd get 6 months probation and mandatory counseling but no jail time. The catch was I'd have to allocute to the basic facts, meaning I'd have to admit in court that I engaged in a physical altercation. Dale said it was probably the best deal we'd get, given the political pressure from the senior's family and their donations. She pointed out that disorderly conduct was a much lesser charge than assault and wouldn't look as bad on my record. Mom and I talked about it all night, weighing the risk of going to trial against the certainty of the plea deal. In the end, I decided to take it just to stop the bleeding and move forward. The plea hearing was in a small courtroom with just the judge, the prosecutor, Dale, and me at the defense table. The senior's father sat in the gallery glaring at me the whole time. When the judge asked for my allocution, I stood and carefully read the statement Dale had helped me prepare, saying only that I engaged in a physical altercation while believing I was in danger. I didn't admit to assault, didn't admit to starting anything, just acknowledged that a fight had occurred and I was involved. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced me to 6 months probation with mandatory weekly counseling sessions. They also made me sign papers saying I'd stay at least 500 feet from the senior's house and wouldn't post anything about the case on social media. The counselor's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant, and every Thursday at 4, I'd sit in her waiting room listening to the nail salon's music through the thin walls. She had this soft voice and kept asking how I felt about things, but I mostly just stared at the clock and gave her the answers she wanted to hear. I told her I was processing my trauma and learning better conflict resolution, while really I was just counting down the sessions until probation ended. The 10 p.m. curfew meant I couldn't work closing shifts at the grocery store anymore, so our income dropped even more. Mom found moving boxes behind the liquor store, and we started packing our stuff on weekends, wrapping plates in old newspapers and stuffing clothes into garbage bags. She'd pick up something like my baby pictures or her teaching awards and just hold them for a while before putting them in a box marked keep. The new apartment was 40 minutes from my school, in a neighborhood where gunshots weren't unusual, and the landlord wanted first month, last month, and security deposit in cash. We sold the couch, the dining table, most of my books, and Mom's winter coat to make the deposit. The place smelled like cigarettes and the previous tenant's cat, but it was all we could afford on her substitute teaching income. 3 weeks after my sentencing, we got notice about the senior's protective order violation case. He stood in front of the judge for maybe 5 minutes while his lawyer explained it was a misunderstanding, and he didn't realize driving past our building counted as contact. The judge fined him $500 and warned him the next violation would mean jail time, but everyone knew that was bullshit. His dad wrote the check right there in the courtroom, and they walked out without even glancing at it. at us. Dale called Mom that afternoon about the union mediation meeting, where the district would make their final offer. They were proposing she resign voluntarily with a neutral reference letter that wouldn't mention the termination proceedings, plus 2 months of severance pay if she signed a non-disclosure agreement about the whole situation. She'd have 72 hours to decide whether to take the deal or continue fighting through the grievance process that could take years and might end with termination for cause on her record. Mom spent those 3 days at the kitchen table with a calculator, adding up bills and trying to figure out if 2 months of pay was worth giving up the fight. She called other districts, but they all said they weren't hiring mid-year, and her situation was already gossip in the teaching community. On the third night, she pushed the papers away and said she wasn't going to let them buy her silence, that some fights were about principle, even if you couldn't win them. Dale warned her it would be a long, expensive process with no guarantee, but Mom had already made up her mind. The continuation school was in an old office building that used to be a medical clinic, with small classes and metal detectors at the entrance. Most kids there had their own stories about why regular school didn't work out, and nobody asked too many questions about your past. I still sat with my back to the wall and jumped when doors slammed, but at least I could focus on graduating instead of watching for threats. The teachers knew we all had baggage and didn't push too hard when someone needed to step out for a minute. I made it through fall semester, keeping my head down and turning in all my work on time. Winter came and went with Mom substitute teaching 3 districts away for half her previous salary, while the union lawyers filed motions and the district lawyers filed delays. We ate a lot of rice and beans, walked instead of driving when we could, and I picked up weekend shifts at a warehouse loading trucks. Then in March, 6 months after that morning in the bathroom, Dale called with news from the state labor board. They'd reviewed all the evidence about the principal announcing Mom's contract terms at the staff meeting and ruled it was a violation of her privacy rights and created a hostile work environment. The district had to offer her reinstatement, but they could transfer her to any school in the district with an opening. No back pay for the months she'd been out, no compensation for legal fees, no admission of wrongdoing, just a teaching position at a middle school 30 miles away if she wanted it. Mom took it because we needed the health insurance and steady paycheck, even though the commute would eat up gas money and she'd be starting over with new students and staff. I finished senior year at the continuation school, graduated in a ceremony with 40 other kids in the school cafeteria, and got accepted to community college for the fall. We're not where we thought we'd be a year ago, but we're still here, still fighting, still refusing to let them break us completely. Well, this has been quite a ride to share with you all. Thanks for sticking around for all my questions and ramblings. I really appreciate it. Catch you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.